Our new Super Tuesday year, and over the next 4 weeks we are going to be looking at a very important question, which is how we understand the existence of God, and particularly how we respond with our faith to a world where disbelief is more the norm. Even if I wasn't married to him, my choice for leading such a conversation would be Dan. Dan is my husband. His background is in philosophy, and you know how like you might read a John Grisham book on the beach, like as a page turner. He'll read a book of theology on the beach as a page turner. Like, this is his bread and butter, and I think that he is just as excited to be leading this study as I am to welcome him here to do this for us. I think we've kind of made a tradition of introducing ourselves at the beginning of each of our Tuesday evening gatherings, because the group keeps changing, and we do hope that we'll get to know one another a little bit through our study as well. I don't want to take a long time doing that tonight, but if you wouldn't mind just going around the room and sharing your name with one another, and at the end we will test Dan on how well he did. And then he'll never come back, probably. So maybe we won't.
Oh, I'll come back, just won't know any of you.
So I'm Martha.
Val. Sharon.
MJ.
Linda. Dory.
Ruth. Angie.
Lori. And Jude.
Jim.
Wendy.
Greg.
Christina.
Janice.
Neil.
Liz. Devin.
John.
Marion.
Doug.
Sheila. And I'm gonna sit down and
Dan, can you do that backwards?
Hey, well, this is a very exciting topic. And one of the things that I want to say to begin with is I don't assume ignorance on the part of my audience, which means that I will teach this and facilitate this to the best of my ability, presenting to you material that is going to be challenging. Some of you will find it challenging, some of you might find it simple. But I never assume ignorance. I assume that we're an adult learning community, and if you don't understand something, you'll let me know, and that if you do understand and you see somebody else struggling, that you will help them and let them know, okay? So I don't want you to feel like, oh my goodness, there's a test at the end of this. There is, but I will not be the one administering the test, and hopefully we're not, any of us, going to be called to that courtroom anytime soon. One of my favorite philosophers and theologians, Thomas Aquinas, says the following: a small error at the beginning of something is a great one at the end. Okay? Keep that in mind as we continue today. And as we continue to flesh out these questions, does God exist? And what does that mean for us as people of faith? To be not only studying that question, but to be engaging with various forms of atheism as we see it across the world. There's a strange new atheism arising in the world today, and we as people of faith have something to say to those challenges. Okay? I just want you to reflect with me on the following. Something that came, if you went to Midnight Mass this past Christmas, you may recognize these words from the first book, or the first chapter of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. He was in the beginning with God. All things are made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the light was the light of the world. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Does God exist? Okay, this question raises a whole other spectrum of questions, right? Does God exist? It's not just one question, it's a whole spectrum of questions. And trying to answer this one question is like trying to catch Niagara Falls in a Dixie cup. It's just too big. Where do you even begin to address the question, does God exist? So we're going to, over the next few weeks, try to catch Niagara Falls in a Dixie cup. But I've spent years and years studying this particular issue. And I can tell you that the horizon of ignorance on this topic, does God exist, ranges from naive simplicity, like, I just don't know, to, sort of agnostic ambivalence, I really don't care, to atheistic rage. The spectrum is quite wide. And I'm going to make no reservations with you this evening. I believe that our Western world, as we know it, is in the state of an intellectual and spiritual crisis that we have not seen for millennia. Donald Trump is a manifestation. Okay? Donald Trump is a manifestation. He's a symptom of this great malaise that threatens the modern world. We can't ignore it anymore. Okay? There is an anti-intellectualism thriving in the world today. And oddly enough, it thrives in parts of the world that we once called the most enlightened nations in history. So how did we get here? Well, when I first encountered the new atheism, that sort of rage-filled atheism that we encounter often in the world, I began to think to myself, you know what, this atheism bears no resemblance to the philosophical atheism that I studied back in my undergraduate years. It bears no resemblance to what I learned atheism was all about. And one of the things that I was surprised that lay at the core of the new atheism is that there is a denial of meaning. There's a denial of meaning that is very, very troubling. It's not just that the new atheists say that there's no God, it's that they're saying there's no greater significance or meaning to life at all. So if there's no greater significance, there's no greater meaning, why ask? Don't ask the questions, right? Don't ask questions of ultimate significance. There's no ultimate significance. You're wasting your time asking, right? Of course, now Martha has already told you that I like to lie on the beach and read philosophy. I'm not ready to go down just yet. I began to realize that there was an intellectualism in modern atheism. Okay? There's nothing greater out there. You're mentally ill if you do believe that there's something greater out there. A delusion, you're delusional, right? You're nodding your heads, we've heard this. It's a delusion, it's mental illness. So don't ask why, don't reveal, right? Who wants to be labeled mentally ill or delusional? Well, that is all what I call a form of anti-intellectualism. It is limiting and restricting the horizon of questions that we're allowed to ask in the modern world. And as a guy who's lying on the beach reading Heidegger, I say, to hell with that. I will ask the questions of ultimate significance. Okay? Let's turn to some of this anti-intellectualism, particularly a heresy that I like to call and others call scientism. Have you ever heard that word? Have you heard the word scientism? Okay, wherever you find the new atheism, you will find the heresy of scientism, false science. And here's a definition that I pulled off of Wikipedia. You know why? Because I figure if I can pull it off of Wikipedia, you can too. And you can point it out easily to people. Scientism is a term generally applied to describe the facile application of science in unwarranted situations not covered by the scientific method. The belief that the methods of natural science or the categories and things recognized in natural science are the only proper elements in any philosophical or other inquiry. Okay? So, is that clear? Or do you have a question about scientism? If you don't understand, let me know. I thrive off of this type of stuff.
Just a little more lay.
Okay.
Okay.
Scientism. Science is going to answer every single question out there. Just give us a few more years, and we will answer all the questions. Nobody else has to be asking questions, only the scientists. Okay? And we will apply the scientific method of the natural sciences. We will look at nature and we will answer all the questions. Okay? And then there'll be no more questions to ask. We'll all lay on the beach and drink mojitos. Right? Of course, if you've taken a vacation, that's great. Day 1, you're lying on the beach with a mojito. By day 6, you're beginning to get restless and you're beginning to what? Look for greater meaning. So scientism dies when you actually begin to realize what kind of a world would exist if we were no longer wanting to ask any questions. Okay? So science has got it all figured out. No debate. Okay. Does that make it clear in layman's terms? Yes.
But it's not actually science, it's people that are giving it that definition, right?
Right.
So I have 3 scientists in my house.
Yeah, exactly. As you're saying, it's not even science. Most scientists
I don't
that
think
way.
they think that way.
There's still questions, just
Science knows that they
might not think that way. Okay? Hold on to that. They might not think that way. Mark?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to expand on that. I mean, like, by no means does this conversation start with like a denial of the offerings of science, right? Like, all you're saying is that to say that it will answer every question or that there's no other method that's needed to answer questions, that's a problem.
Absolutely. Do we think that? Am I clear? I'm not denying science. I don't want to be on YouTube.
You're not going after all scientists, are you?
I'm not going after scientists. No, I'm not.
Because a lot of scientists are, in fact, very humble and very much aware that they're still learning and still finding out, but they never say that.
Precisely.
Right, I'm just to be clear, because I'm married to one, right?
And your husband does not fall under the category of science.
No.
But I will tell you that a lot of people in the popular world believe that. Okay? And that the new atheism and new forms of philosophical atheism have hit the world by storm, and people will defend this particular ideology. Okay? So, where are we going here? Well, it means if the only proper elements of philosophical inquiry, according to scientism, is the ones that we can see. Okay? Only the visible world. Only the visible world matters. Okay? The things that we can see, the things that we can test, nature. Okay? Well, what does the Christian faith tell us? I believe visible and invisible, nice and Greek, but common prayer. I couldn't find one at the cathedral, so I googled it. So in the old book of Common Prayer, it says, "I believe in all things visible and invisible." In the new translation, that's common to both the Book of Alternative Services and in the New Roman Ritual, it says of things that's seen and unseen. Okay? So already the Christian faith is going to be in conflict with any totalitarian style of scientism that says, no, only the material world, only the seen, that's the only stuff that matters. Okay? We are now in conflict. Okay? We didn't even get over the first sentence of our creed, and we're already in conflict. Ain't that exciting?
Yes.
Absolutely. Good. So who is the father of popular atheistic scientism? Does anybody know who the father? Oh, I'm hearing it. What? Oh, woo! Look at the serpentine eyes. Woo! Is Dawkins a scientist, or has he succumbed to scientism? Okay, Dawkins has experienced a real fall from grace. He was once a very well-respected scientist. He was a very popular scientist. He engaged the whole culture, like Bill Nye the Science Guy of the European world. But then he turned into a bombastic, loudmouth advocate of new atheism. So angry, right? And he fell from the level of scientist to that of a disciple of scientism. And you know what's sad? He doesn't even understand it. Okay? So if we're going to talk about God and atheism in the new world or in the age that we live in, we can't help but run into and bump along and grind up against Dawkins. He's an easy target. But he made himself an easy target, and that's why I don't feel bad trying to take him to task. Okay? This is what Dawkins has to say about religion. He says, I'm against religion because it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding the world. I don't agree with that. I don't think I've run into that. I go back to the creed and I look at it and I think, well, of all things visible and invisible, right? Okay, and I don't agree with Dawkins on that. He says one of the truly bad effects of religion is that it teaches us that it is a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding. Well, you know what? I studied Anselm. You know, Anselm back in, what was it? What, the 3rd century said, credo ut intelligam, faith that seeks understanding. Huh? Okay, well, gosh. What is Dawkins talking about? Well, it continues. These are all quotes from Dawkins. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is the belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. When one person, I like this, when one person suffers from delusion, it's called insanity. When many people suffer from a delusion, it is called religion. I know. Listen, pastoral care can be attained through St. George's. They have. But you know what? You know which one really kills me? Is this one. Science flies into the moon, religion flies into buildings. And I think, you know what? Dawkins must be the last. Yeah.
There's a difference.
Absolutely. Science flies into religion flies into buildings. I'm thinking, he actually thinks that a bunch of Muslim Bush pilots drove the airplanes into the World Trade Center. I don't know what's more outrageous. That he doesn't believe in God or he believes the narrative about 9/11.
Religion doesn't start wars. Intolerance starts wars.
Yeah.
Oh, right. But there's Dawkins. Okay. Let's continue on. Any questions? How are you feeling right now?
Angry. A little angry. That's right.
It's really hard to like stay peaceful when you hear that because our faith teaches us to accept and to tolerate it, to just say, okay, you know, that's what you believe and have grace. But it's really hard when you get that because what you're feeling is being, what they accuse us of doing is being judged. And they're constantly accusing Christians of being judgmental and everything, you know, and using our faith as an excuse. That's what we're getting.
I think it's human decency, actually.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, true. It's not even, yeah, true.
Yeah, same word.
Regardless.
Human decency. You know what?
Yeah, just,
Yeah. What happened to human decency?
yeah. Just let us be what we are, as long as we're not hurting you and ourselves.
So why, like, I mean, you know, somebody brought up rage. You said Dawkins, he has a lot of rage. Yeah, okay. What's behind his rage? What do you think?
Honestly, I think that a lot of atheists, it's funny, I think a lot of atheists aren't so much that they don't believe in God, I think they're mad at it. I really do. It's not that they don't believe in God, I think they just are really angry with it, or angry with people who still believe in it, because somehow they feel let down by it.
Yeah, why be angry? Mark?
Just to kind of play the other side for a minute, I think what he has said here is really awful and not true. There are a lot of people of faith out there that give religion a bad name.
True.
So, I think we have to be honest about that as well. The criticism isn't entirely without some evidence, right? There are people of faith who will, kind of fall into all of these categories. So I think there's always something for us to learn in even the most unfair accusations.
Well, over the course of history, the church hasn't exactly been supportive of science.
Yeah.
We had Copernicus and Galileo and Darwin and all of that, and the reaction of the church in those years. It's not surprising that people like that get angry.
Okay, so he's not completely without cause. Neil and then over.
No, I'm just scratching my head.
Yeah, I think I was going to build off the comment that Martha made, Marion built on. So, oftentimes the anger or frustration is not necessarily, it's misdirected at religion when really where it should be is on religious institutions who can be inflexible and who can, be trapped in the dogmatic trappings of the past and thinking of the past, and that should not necessarily be confused with religion itself. But oftentimes that's what people think of when they think of religion. They think of the institution of the church and the actions of that institution.
The most powerful group supporting Donald Trump right now is the Christian right in the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah,
So, that is a very public voice that that makes a lot of people, maybe Christian and non-Christian, say, wow, there's
Yeah, the loudest voice is what's being
Yeah.
heard, and the quieter majority is not being heard, and that's, the painting is all in the same brush.
That's right. So he is, right? He is painting in broad strokes. Let's get one more, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
I think you can sort of take one of the first quotes and turn it back on him, because it's, I think his anger maybe comes from his inability to
Understand
want
the
to
entire world.
understand.
Yeah.
Right.
And to not research, but sort of go on that journey, the unwillingness to do it.
Well, you know what? In a few moments, I'm going to throw some slides up there of his colleagues, okay, in their critique of his work. Okay. So let's, is that okay? So I mean, this is all good conversation, right? This is what we want, that help learning community. Okay. So I would say, Dawkins himself, again, I'm just quoting him, but I say the new atheism, scientism in a nutshell, and this is in Dawkins' own world, or in his own words, and this is basically his philosophy, okay? In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Whoa! What a cheerful guy. I mean, right? Right, so it's not just about God, right? This isn't just about does God exist. He's really undermining whether there is any meaning to life at all. Okay? Because no design. He says there's no design and no purpose. What I find odd about that is he says there's no design and no purpose, but I'm a scientist and my whole raison d'etre is to study design and purpose and nature.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
How everything works.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that there is a decipherable design.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes on to say, I mean, evolution is basically the only thing that can explain it. But, I mean, you look at evolution and I mean, it's really nothing but a script, okay? So he's not completely consistent in his thought. And in fact, a person once said to me, all his atheism and all his rage aside, he's really just having an internal conversation with himself that he drags the public along too. Okay.
What kind of science?
It's
is
funny,
this?
if he was in the, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
What kind of science? Just out of curiosity, what is his science?
Biology. He's a biologist.
Yes.
Yeah, biology.
It was funny, he was back in the Middle Ages, they would probably kill him or put him in an asylum or something for being raging against God.
Definitely kill him.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah.
would.
Oh, speaking against the religion like that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Tongue drawn and quarter.
Well,
Done.
now, who are you people supporting here? My side or Dawkins? Yeah. Okay, so let's continue, okay? Because I think it's important for us to continue talking about. I mean, Dawkins is a pretty bleak fellow, okay? His philosophy is nihilistic, okay? He doesn't see any particular value in religion, or as we're beginning to learn, he doesn't study philosophy either. But he's making a lot of claims. So he says, what has theology ever said that is of the smallest use to anybody? I can think of many, but when has theology ever said anything that is demonstrably true and is not obvious? What makes you think that theology is a subject at all? Okay, so I mean, basically, hey, look, if I say this about theology, then I don't have to study it. It doesn't have anything to say, right? So why pay attention to the other viewpoints out there? I've already decided that if you're a theologian or a person of faith, you have nothing to say. I don't have to listen to you. A little bit dangerous, right? It's kind of starting to sound like what's going on south of the border, right? He says, faith is a great cop-out, a great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief, in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Well, and then, he wrote that book, eh? The God
Yeah.
Delusion.
I wonder if he's ever been in love, because you can't prove that either.
That's for session 3.
Sorry.
So I do these things called thought projects. We've been thinking through a project here. There's obviously no lack of involvement in the audience here. But the new atheism and scientism often walk lockstep. Okay, remember I said where you find one, you often find the other. Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, is a good example of this. What do you think are some of the dangers? We're going to do this question first. What do you think are some of the dangers of atheistic scientists? What are some of the dangers? The pitfalls?
Well, what I've learned in the last few minutes, it kind of breeds hate and intolerance.
A lack of compassion.
A lack of
Seems to be the-
compassion.
Yeah.
Restricting to just the physical world, so there's, I'm sorry, so there's no understanding of love and kindness and all the things we can't see.
And
I'm sorry, I
it's-
cut you off, I didn't mean to.
You got there.
Hopelessness, yeah.
I was going to say it limits our natural curiosity and wonder. If the only questions that are relevant are questions that science can answer, then it limits our ability to ask questions and understand.
Would he enjoy the sunrise?
Yeah, like
Well, I mean, yeah, he probably would.
joy. Joy's a
Okay.
big one, that's
He
right.
probably would. Because, I mean, that's something that he can...
scientifically.
Right.
It wouldn't be spiritual.
It wouldn't, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a spiritual experience. It would be, like, I think that he describes it like this: I'm in wonder of the process of nature. I mean, it's beautiful. He says, it's beautiful without having to drag all this God stuff into it, okay? Well, you know what? I mean, I can understand. Sometimes you call a spade, okay? Sometimes a beautiful sunset is a beautiful sunset. And he's taking it one step further when he begins to then, continue on this track of all other forms of meaning making are discredited. Okay? Anybody else? What are some of the dangers?
If all other factors are meaningless, doesn't that dispute his idea of being a scientist in the first place? Because scientists, they want to discover, don't they? They want to continue to discover and things like that. So if he's saying that there is nothing but what you can see and what you can analyze, then there's what's the point of anything? I mean, like you said, it's hopeless. It's
The most
it's
advanced,
hopelessness.
the most advanced part of science today deals with things that you cannot see.
That's right. That's
Go on, go on. Tell us.
The most
Yeah.
advanced scientists in the world today are looking for particles that they can't even measure.
Dark matter, dark energy, theoretical physics.
So the biggest danger I see from doing what do you call it? Scientism,
Scientists.
is that it leads to closed minds.
Yeah.
Scientists are always asking questions.
No.
Yeah,
They're
that's
always
the-
looking for the next answer.
Oh, yeah.
And the foremost scientists of the world today
Oh, sorry.
are getting to the point where they believe that they will never find that last particle. They
Yeah.
they don't think they will. The theory of everything is always out there, but they will never find it.
Well, we're gonna hold on to that course, because I think it's slide 19 or something.
One last thing on design.
On design, yeah.
One of the foremost scientists in the world today has written a wonderful book called The Grand Design.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stephen Hawking's. I think that's a book that should be read.
Yeah, well, I mean, the minute you say design and grand design, you are no longer in the realm of scientists. Okay?
He does not have a closed mind.
And he's had quite a journey too,
Yes,
in terms of
exactly.
his
He has.
relationship with this question. It's very fascinating.
It is. It really truly
When
is.
you use the word relationship, which is when you're saying what's the danger, to me, in all of the comments that he has made, there's not room for relationship, and connected back like to compassion and the other thing. So to me, that's a danger.
Yeah, well, there's no ground to be compassion. I mean, you read that quote, right? Well, if everything's just pure chance, then why the heck should I be kind to you, right? Like, I could walk out on the street and an anvil falls on my head and kills me. I mean, time is limited, right?
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of things. So what other ways of knowing, what other ways of knowing are implicitly denied by this scientism and new atheism? Think about
Introspection.
it. Okay, well, yeah, tell us more.
Well, I mean, introspection is the process of trying to understand by looking within and contemplating and putting pieces together. And, you know, it's not an external science where you're bringing evidence together, more of an internal thought process.
So we talked about compassion, like the relating to each other's families, that kind of, you know, invisible connection that we have. It's not just love, but it's like a visceral almost connection.
Well, I mean, what else is eliminated from this?
Intuition.
Intuition.
I would say it eliminates imagination.
Yes.
I mean, I would think that he's not going to enjoy stand-up comedy very much. He's probably not going to enjoy fiction very much, right? Like, no imagination.
I mean, you're right. And what's amazing is that Dawkins is an English scientist. He stands in the shadow of Tolkien,
Yeah.
Chesterton,
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, C.S. Lewis. I mean, like he's on the continent that where mythology has dominated for 40,000 years. So there's a lot more at stake, right? Not just theology, not just God. There are other ways of knowing. Do people agree with that? Well, let's look at this. What I don't think Dawkins has realized is that if the only source of truth is science, then there exists no basis for any non-scientific form of understanding whatsoever. So yes, we can do away with religion, but we also need to dispose of art, music, politics, drama, non-quantitative history, literature, philosophy, the qualitative social sciences, and poetry are all, from a duly scientific perspective, imperfect means of engaging with the same material.
Okay. Agreed, yeah.
I think he kind of gives science a bad name too, because, well, no, there's and I thought of it because my daughter took a human anatomy course, a human dissection course, and she said, until you actually see inside a person where the muscles and the vessels and everything are going, you take it on faith that that's how the human body, which is science, is made up.
And she must marvel at that design too, because it's really so intricate, you know. Yeah.
I find that a really helpful perspective.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good.
Neil?
I would also suggest that if the only authority is science, then morality goes out the window as well.
Yeah.
That's a
Troubling
hot topic.
notion.
That's a hot topic at Oxford right now. There's a fellow by the name of Ritchie, and he has written a book called From Morality to Metaphysics. And he says, look, if we can't answer questions of metaphysics, there's no way we're going to be able to answer questions of morality. And morality does not make sense, evolutionary-wise.
Well,
No.
and, you know, I don't want to jump the gun here, but that especially becomes a key question when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Because, you know, if we're just looking for the most efficient and, you know, scientifically reasonable way of governing our affairs, like the human race should be eliminated and artificial intelligence can just take over because, you know, that's going to do things in a completely consistent and totally,
That makes me sad.
Yeah.
well, but I mean, that is actually kind of a key philosophical question right now is how humanity and artificial intelligence are going to interact
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the future. And if we're saying that that's the only way of kind of establishing how we should order our lives, then like, we're done.
I've seen the Matrix, it doesn't end well.
What?
I said I've seen the Matrix, it doesn't end well.
Or Terminator.
I mean, you can imagine if Dawkins was put in charge of writing a program for artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? Like artificial intelligence that doesn't have any heuristic ability for its consciousness and self-reflection. I mean, what would he program? Well, how would he program? A purely rational, logical conclusion.
With a bad attitude.
With a bad attitude, oh, gee whiz. Okay, so this is me talking, and what I would say here is, ironically, atheistic scientism undermines science. Okay? Because the laws governing the universe, hypogravity, thermodynamics, chemistry, mathematics, are all invisible realities. Okay? We see them affect things, but we can't see them directly. At the same time, the invisible laws are universal. They apply at all times and places, and they all exist independent of anyone's ability to see them. So, science itself seems to be based on a type of faith in the invisible laws of nature, which we assume to exist, and yet are unable to prove by appealing to nature. If the laws exist outside or independent of things, where do the laws exist? It's elementary, just apply the 5 W's and we're already moving beyond the scope of scientists. Right? So, does that make sense? I wrote that. You can tell me I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Or does it make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay. You know, 1 + 1 = 2 is true independent of my existence.
Right.
Right? In fact, none of us have to be here for that to be true. Right? In fact, it doesn't have to actually be anything for that to still be theoretically true. Okay? So the laws themselves exist independent of nature. Okay? Dan says, whoa, real atheists don't use microwaves.
Okay, that one you need to explain.
Yeah. Do they
I mean, it's my humorous way. I mean, every time somebody comes up to me and says, you know, I'm an atheist, I usually say, I'm Ukrainian. Right? Then I began to realize they didn't appreciate the humor. So, people say, I'm an atheist. I say, do you use a microwave? Yeah, I use a microwave. I say, you're not an atheist.
Believe in it.
Okay? Why don't atheists use microwaves? Well, because Dawkins is assuming that these blind forces are working, and there's no rhyme, and there's no reason, there's no design. Remember all these things he kept saying? No rhyme, no reason, no design. Okay? Now, I got to tell you, when I take my cup of coffee in the morning and I have to reheat it, I go and I put it in the microwave, and I hit 25, and then 25 seconds later, what comes out? A turkey!
Right? You're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
A turkey!
That's not my, I don't know what
No,
it
what
is.
comes out? I mean, seriously, what comes out? Right. Why? Why does a hot cup of coffee come out?
Because X-rays transfer energy to the liquid of heating it.
And all of that is based on the fact that there must be design.
Right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, I would put my coffee mug in there, I would hit the thing, I'd get the microwave going, but there would be no guarantee that a hot cup of coffee would come out. If Dawkins is right, there's no purpose, there's no design, just blind indifference, then it's possible that I put my cup in and out comes a squid. Because there's no guarantee, right? In order for the microwave to work, in order for the scientific method to be true, it must be reproducible. That's the whole scientific method. It's reproducible, it's repeatable, it's predictable, it's objective. Okay? So, real atheists don't use microwaves because you would never have any guarantee that you'll put a cup in there of coffee and it wouldn't come out something other than a cup of coffee. So I said, remember we were talking about inquiry. We were talking about what is at risk. And I said, look, just apply the 5 W's. Remember back in elementary school? We're naturally curious. Why stifle that? If we are to ask the question, why is it so meaningfully, we must have at least a tacit awareness that reality, the real or reality as a whole, allows for many more possibilities than the particular reality or state of affairs that we happen to be experiencing. This recognition that it could have been otherwise reveals our awareness that reality allows for other possibilities. Robert Spitzer, you know who Robert Spitzer is? He's a Roman Catholic Jesuit, he's a theologian and a physicist, and he has just written a quartet on the soul's yearning, like the state of the soul in the modern world today. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, but I mean, what do you think of what he's saying? Is it clear? I'm mindful of the time.
It could have been otherwise. That really speaks to me. That you have to be open. You have to allow that there are different theories. There are different, there are questions that aren't going to be answered by you, but maybe, and the searching. And that's what it's all about. And faith is about searching.
Yeah, no, Dawkins doesn't agree with you.
No, I don't agree with you.
Why would you do that? It's useless. What does theology ever
What's the point of
contribute?
existing if you're not going to learn more? That's why we're here. It's in it to learn and to grow.
You've got mental illness.
Oh, well, I do, but not that way.
No, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
That was
But this is what
advocated, right?
keeps me sane.
Right. This is you too, right?
Yeah.
So Martin Heidegger. Anybody know Martin Heidegger, German theologian and philosopher? Okay. Wrote a book, and he says, why are there things that are rather than nothing? Why are there things that are rather than nothing? He just looks around.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, why are there things? Okay. He wrote this book called The Fundamental Question of Metaphysics, an introduction to metaphysics.
That sounds a little bit like the anthropomorphic question. Why are things the way they are? Well, the answer is because if they were different, we wouldn't be here to ask the question.
So one of the things that Heidegger says it's interesting, right? Because nobody asked the question of being. He deals with the question of being. And one of the things that he says is, what is interesting is that we're just thrown into existence. You and I and everybody else, we were just thrown into existence. Nobody called me up and said, how would you like to be born on April 4th, 1976? Nobody asked me, okay? I was just thrown into the world. So why are there things that are? There he is, Martin Heidegger. Ooh, it's the German. The guy never said anything in one sentence that he could say in 14 volumes. Oh, look at that. Look, Canadian flag. You know what that means? That means Canadian content. There is always the further question. Who said that? Bernard Lonergan. Oh, Canadian. My thesis director once told me, you know what you should do in preparation for it? You should read Bernard Lonergan's Insight.
Oh, is that it? On the beach.
Yeah, on the beach. I've slogged through it. This is one of those books, right? And it's interesting because the story about this book is, in good fashion, I sat down and I began to read it. Why am I reading this? Oh my God, what the heck? What did I get myself into, right? So I get to the last page, and the book is called Insight. Okay? I get to basically the last chapter, and guess what the insight is?
He doesn't know for sure.
There's always a further question.
Yeah.
I thought, this is the first time in my life I wish I started on page 840.
Yeah.
But Lonergan, he says, we're curious by nature. We can't stop that. You can't stop people from being curious, of asking the next question. The more we learn, the broader the horizon becomes. Okay, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about Lonergan because I always love raising up the Canadians. But Lonergan is getting a lot of attention today because of some of his writings. But in contradiction, to a totalitarian scientism, we can at least raise up a Canadian who reminds us, there's always another question to be asked. So, remember I said that not all of Dawkins' colleagues agreed with him? Okay. We're going to just look at a few critiques, okay, because we've been critiquing Dawkins, but actually there are academics out there who engage with him on a regular basis, who have tried to get his attention, who have tried to teach him. And they're worth listening to also.
Now, are these specifically scientists?
These are theologians, these are
Okay,
people
so
that work in
variety.
departments of philosophy. I mean, Dawkins, he thinks, he walks into a department of philosophy and thinks that he knows philosophy, right? So it's when philosophers, they want to respond.
Why? Apparently it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. So, this fellow here, Jeremy Waldron, says, one of the problems with the new atheism, the scientism today is this. They often assume that they know what a religious argument is like. Okay, they present it as a crude prescription from God, backed up with threat of hellfire. With this in mind, they think it obvious that religious argument should be excluded from public life. Okay? But those who have bothered to make themselves familiar with existing religious-based arguments in modern political theory know that this is mostly a travesty. Jeremy Walton, are we okay for time?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. I have been denounced by my fellow unbelievers for stupidity, betrayal, senility, and everything you could think of, and none of them have ever read a word I've ever written. Anthony Flew. Does anybody know the story of Anthony Flew?
I think so.
Oh, yeah. Spent his whole academic career promoting atheism. Picked up a book of Aristotle and rejected everything that he had written. And said, you know what, I went back to the sources, I went back to Aristotle, I'm wrong. We can't have our whole scientific method, we can't have this world without some theistic implication. And I tell you, the atheistic world went berserk. So that's what he's talking. He said, I've been denounced. They told stupidity, betrayal, senility, and everything they think of, but none of them have ever bothered to engage my work.
A similar thing has been said of Stephen Hawking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he got in a lot of trouble when he alluded to the fact that there might be teleology, which is goal-centeredness at the heart of creation. Yeah. But hey, look, Anthony Flew, young guy, making dumb young mistakes. What has he ever contributed to society, Hawkins would say? When I read The God Delusion, I was both saddened and troubled. How, I wondered, could such a gifted popularizer of the natural sciences, who once had such a passionate concern for the objective analysis of evidence, turn into such an aggressive anti-religious propagandist with an apparent disregard for evidence that was not favorable to his case? You know you're mad when you get a run-on sentence like that one. Dawkins clearly has little interest in engaging religious believers who will simply find themselves appalled by the flagrant misrepresentation of their beliefs and lifestyles. Is the case for atheism really so weak that it has to be bolstered by such half-baked nonsense? Alistair McGrath, Cambridge scientist and theologian. Actually, he holds a double appointment. It's one of the rare appointment in England, that he is both on the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Theology simultaneously. So obviously he has nothing to say or contribute. Whoa! Dawkins asked his friend, fellow atheist, if he would write a book review for The God Delusion. To which he responds, I thought your new book is really bad and not worthy of you. I think that you and Richard Dawkins are absolute disasters in the fight against intelligent design. What we need is not knee-jerk atheism, but serious grappling with the issues. Neither of you is willing to take Christianity seriously and to engage with the new ideas. And that's Michael Roos on Dawkins and Dennett, another atheist. Right? So you see, it's not just people of faith who are arguing now against Dawkins, his own camp. The scientists are beginning to say, this is really poor and shoddy stuff. There it is. Early on.
I've seen him before.
Yeah, have you?
I think so. I don't know. I recognize that face.
I like this one. One is almost tempted to think that Dawkins' research for the philosophical chapters of his book consisted entirely of a quick thumbing through of philosophy of dummies. Almost except for this, I wouldn't want to insult its author, Thomas Morris, who is a very capable philosopher. Edward Professor, American theologian and philosopher. Oh, and right from Montreal. Dawkins' reasons for believing that science can sideline religion hardly inspire confidence. They draw heavily on an a simple distinction between faith and science, and our own Charles Taylor. Yeah, wonderful author. Oh, it keeps on going. I find it strangely comforting that people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens take the trouble to attack us so viciously. It shows that, like Eric, they are rattled. They know their numbers being called. Their power base is being challenged. Good. That's how it should be. Dr. Thomas is right. Bishop of Durham.
Also, spent time in Canada.
Sorry. Scott.
He said also spent.
Tom Wright spent time in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
We can almost claim it as Canadian.
I'll put Her Majesty's coat of arms there.
Should be at least a faded Canadian flag.
Yeah.
So, George Nathan was a philosopher, professor of mine, and wonderful. I don't know if he's still at Brock, George Nathan, but he taught me rationalism and empiricism. And I remember a class of his, he said, academics don't make little mistakes. They make huge mistakes. Right?
Can't read them off there.
So what's the new atheism's error?
I think the biggest error is, I harken back to a lot of, believe it or not, fantasy books that I read. Because you mentioned Tolkien, and how they talk about good and evil, and how if everything's completely good, then it kind of feeds on itself, and it disregards everything else that's kind of in between. And with everything totally science, it's sort of the same idea. If everything's completely logical and scientifically proven, then it just doesn't leave room for so much more that there is in life. There's so much that I think completely leaves out, and it's very restrictive.
Sure, very restrictive. Yeah.
It occurs to me that it makes at least two errors. The first is the error of assumption of what questions the scientific method can and cannot answer. You know, I think they're expanding it probably beyond what is reasonable. So that's one error. I think the other error is to summarily reject a perspective or point of view or set of theories without due process or consideration.
Absolutely. Agreed. Anybody else?
It's interesting that the people that call themselves atheists will say that you can't really believe in anything that you can't see or can't measure or can't replicate by experiment. And yet the two most crucial questions that scientists are grappling with today are what is dark matter and what is dark energy? Because they can't see it, they can't measure it, but they see how the universe is operating and how the universe is expanding, how galaxies behave, and they don't behave as they are predicted that they should behave. And they have decided that there must be these two things, dark energy and dark matter, without which the universe as we observe it would not behave as it is behaving. And so the scientists today are finding themselves believing in something that they cannot see, cannot understand, cannot measure, but they know it must be there.
Yeah. And of course, you know, like nobody's ever done that before in history, right? Like, no, the 40,000 years of human history, we've never acted on anything without absolute evidence. No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I 100%.
Scientism is bullheaded narrow-mindedness. It's just,
Scientists, I'm not anti-science. I just don't agree with scientists. I think we have something to say. Okay, so thank you. You've been really great. I don't want to bring, I'm aware of the time, right? And the kids are going to come back soon and we want to have a time to debrief, et cetera, et cetera. I hope that you've enjoyed that. I know that it's a lot. You know, it's a lot to present. There's no quiz after this. What we are doing
I
is,
took notes and everything.
yeah, good for you. Apparently it's being recorded. If that goes on YouTube, honest to God, I'll go concerned. I can't. They will come after me. Don't let them come after me. Again, this is an adult learning community. Where I go from here, because the question is really, does God exist? It's on the existence of God. But today what I thought we had to do was talk about scientism, talk about some of those challenges, and give you some idea of what the arguments are and how we've responded and how people of faith and people of reason have responded. And then next week, I'm going to take a lot of the conversation that we've had here, and through the week, I'm going to begin to formulate the next chapter. Okay, so I don't know. I have no idea where I'm going with this next week. I'm going to probably.
You don't have purpose and design?
I have no purpose. No design. I'm looking for the day. I want to land the beach with mojitos. I want Doreen to do all the work. Right? What I'll do is I'll take the general conversation and hit my stacks at home. And next week we will begin to talk about, you know, what are theologians and philosophers saying about God? You know, what is God? And hopefully it'll be animated like today was.
Yeah, it was great. That was great.
So anything, I don't want to leave things in suspension, you know, like is there anything anybody wants to say, last words, thoughts, questions? Can you clarify, you know, is there anything I can clarify a little bit more?
I wish I had this information like 10 or 15 years ago when two of my 3 kids proudly claimed that they were now atheists. And
Do they use microwaves?
oh, thank you, and they're not. And I just told them, I said, just, okay, I've heard you, and but let's just sort of put that on the shelf and leave it there for a little while. And they're coming around, they're not, because they didn't know what it meant. Really, but I can't wait till Easter when we're all together and we can discuss this.
Oh, geez, you know what I'm going to give you a zinger next one. I remember, okay, do we have time for one more analogy? Back when I was studying philosophy, I was kind of tutoring this friend of mine that I knew came from a very devout family. And he was asking questions about philosophy and existence of God, etc. And I said, there's no potential in God. And then I went on to explain that to him. and I'm going to explain it to you too, but not today. There's no potential in God. Well, he went back home to this devout family and at Easter dinner said, Dan says that there is no potential in God.
Oh, no.
Well, apparently the whole house erupted. He was banned from being my friend for a moment. But it gave him an opportunity to explain this to his family, and then they were fairly convinced. So you know, maybe next week we pick that up. There's no potential in God with my buddy here, Thomas Aquinas. Okay, we'll begin to look at the proofs for the existence of God. Sound good?
Yeah,
To be very generous.
Thank you very much.
You're